So, as mentioned, the ASBEC project, we are really interested in using what is ASBEC's superpower. So, we are a network of organisations. We are industry bodies, professional associations, not-for-profits, working collaboratively and cooperatively with government observers and research bodies to pursue a sustainable built environment. And again, like Hudson mentioned, like James mentioned, sustainability is a big mixing pot of everything. We are guided by the UN Sustainable Development Goals and our commitments under the Paris targets, but we recognise again that trying to tackle a solution or a problem in relation to carbon is a step in the right direction. So we're really interested. We love the power of consensus and agreement is amazing. It's phenomenal. We relish the relationship we have with all levels of government because what a very diverse group of industry and professional organisations agree on, that's amazing. And so let's supercharge that. So it's a really collaborative forum in that regard. As Hudson mentioned, we've had 25 years of experience looking at operational carbon. Haven't solved the problems yet. We're still working on that in relation to buildings and infrastructure, but we have produced a lot of research cooperatively with our research partners and industry bodies to really inform policy development and supercharge policy development. So a lot of the research reports that ASBEC has cooperatively published have gone into the National Construction Code. There's some really tangible results and outcomes that ASBEC has collaboratively done together. So that's a wonderful thing. We've had lots of progress in operational carbon, but we did realise that getting that national momentum embodied is one of those gaps. We recognise that there's so many initiatives happening, but it's at the moment, embodied carbon, it's in a bit of a competitive world. It's a buzzword. So everyone's out there doing their own thing. My tool's better than your tool. I'll measure the more accurate work. But if we actually want to get impact across the country and fitting into our global economy, we need to work together. We need to band together. We need to get consistency, not just in the measurement and tools, but consistency in the ask, consistency in the direction that we're going. Because from our perspective, the built environment, our role in this embodied carbon topic is twofold. The first one is that really important signal to our value chain, to say that we will only be choosing low carbon materials. You need to look at your processes. You need to look at the way you operate and have a look at your internal abatement, because that's what we want from you. So it's that demand, but at the same time, it needs to be the built environment understanding the way that we use resources, our impact on nature, the way that we need to revisit the way we design buildings and infrastructure. So there's two aspects to this work. The beauty of ASBEC as well is that we cover not just buildings, but we cover infrastructure as well. So if we're trying to do this at a national level, we need to be consistent. So concrete is concrete, whether it's in a bridge or a building. We need to be asking the same things, whether it's infrastructure or if it's in the built environment. Noting that the built environment, again, is quite heterogeneous. What might happen in a commercial building compared to a home, there's different challenges. So we need to be aware what the policy levers are to create the ecosystem to support this unified approach to embodied carbon. And the government of Australia recognises this importance in the national consistency, because if you have a piecemeal approach, it's not only is it confusing and not only can you not understand the actual emissions reductions that you're achieving, but it costs Australia. So if we had the one national way of doing things that's aligned globally, it's so much more productive for our economy. So we were funded by the Australian Department of Climate Change, Environment, Energy and Water, DECU, another acronym I will not repeat again, also facilitated by our wonderful folk at Neighbours. And the idea is with this project, again, I mentioned before, we are not trying to create yet another piece of thought leadership. We're actually trying to get everything that is happening in the nation and drive it together in a consistent approach. And that's a approach based on the measurement and tool methodology that James spoke about today, based on a whole range of consultations that have been occurring over the last couple of years, started off by the Green Building Council and then by neighbours. Also recognising that infrastructure is going through their own process and almost leapfrogging the built environment, because embodied emissions form quite a big component of infrastructure. So we're trying to tie it all together and not duplicate, which is a beautiful thing. And that's where you all come in as well. So it's wonderful to be working with you all on this. And then what I might do is pass over to Jeremy, who has a wonderful history in this space. Ex-Lendlease. So we heard Lendlease mentioned earlier by Hudson. We had the joy of stealing Jeremy when he left Lendlease to be the project manager for the ASBEC project, especially since Jeremy has amazing ties within MECLA as well. So tying it all together. So I'll pass over to Jeremy now.
Thanks, Alison. Hi online as well.
Yes.
As Alison alluded to, and James gave a great summary of neighbours' process that they've gone through, there's been a lot of lessons learned already in terms of what they've heard from industry and what we've gained from that. And we're lucky also to use ThinkStep as our consultants who've worked on the neighbours' work as well as Infrastructure Australia's development work as well. So we're not starting from a ground zero. We've actually, as Alison said, taking on this from learning from and leveraging what's been already done. So a lot of the things that have already been identified to date has helped us identify already 5 key themes and actually 10 issues within those themes that actually help us to understand what have we already heard from industry are some of the challenges around how do we deepen and scale up embodied carbon reductions. And having been involved with MECLA since its inception, I can tell you there's a lot of very smart people trying to tackle this from so many different angles. And the opportunity to be a part of helping to shape policy and implementation of embodied carbon is something I take with a lot of gratitude, and really want to make sure that we deliver the most important aspect of really scaling this and deepening the ability of our full supply chain to respond to that, because it is a really big, as I said, out of the work that's already been done from stakeholder consultations that have involved many organisations, these 5 themes have been coming up as being the 5 key areas of concern, whether that be government leadership, measurement, demand and the signals, products and the availability of that, and skills. So these ones have helped frame some of the early work that we've identified as part of the policy work around how do we actually deepen our understanding of what are the opportunities to actually have policies that respond to those things. And in regards to that, I've got the slides here to take you through a little bit more detail of some of these issues that have been framed under these themes. Certainly, as we had before, government leadership and support for change is a really important aspect to make sure that it's helping to provide the signals to industry to respond to. I won't go through all the details here because I think we are a bit short on time, but I know you'll get the slides and some of them will actually be useful for the exercise that you'll do later today. But certainly, and some of these have already been talked to in terms of the commitments, the planning incentives, the linking of targets, etc. So all very aspects that are not things you wouldn't have already probably heard already before. Measurements already come up a bit, and I'm really grateful that James provided a framing of kind of where neighbours have got to and the recognition of there's a whole range of things out there. And as Alison said, this coming together now is a really important piece for us to move forward around a collaborative process, but keeping in mind there are a range of things that are still issues that we need to deal with in terms of making sure we do get a consistent, comparable methodology. That's really important. Along with also how do we make sure that those product emissions data is actually consistent and trusted. And certainly heard today there's still a bit more work to go, but we're not alone in this. We've spent some time talking to America and Europe and realising that they're on the same journey. They've got deep databases. They're creating the amount of EPDs in one day that we would see in a year in terms of their concrete mix designs, because they've worked out how to really produce that in a way that works with industry. So there's a lot to learn from and not see that we're actually starting from a ground zero, because there's actually quite a momentum that's actually out there, and address a number of those challenges that I mentioned already before. There's also this trade-off issue. We hear this all the time. So I guess it's a recognition that we know that actually we need to make sure that we're not focused on one and forgetting the other, but equally, as James said, these things are locked in from the day that you install them. You can't do anything afterwards. And so we actually need to focus on this as a key issue, because we can't change the kind of embodied carbon impact that those materials have had being installed. You can certainly change things later in an operational sense, but this is why the focus on this area is so important. As I said before, on demand, industry inertia and the slow change that we've seen, there's really a recognition of frustration of why are we not seeing kind of the signals that help industry actually respond to that? How do we make sure that we're not starting to ask the questions about embodied carbon where they've already gone to approved for construction and starting on site, and we've actually not thought about it properly at the start? There's so many of those issues that kind of just become part of the, no wonder we've got this inertia problems. We're just talking about it and planning for success at the wrong time of the staging of projects. There's also quite a lot around this issue of inconsistent and unstable market demand for low carbon products. There's plenty of great products out there, but it's that chicken and egg of, we'll do a lot more on that product when we see the demand, and until such time we'll do a little bit of it and you'll pay a lot for it. So they're not ready to make that investment. So we've seen that a lot of times with some of these new products that would actually be an amazing scaled up project if they could actually solve their chicken and egg problem around when they choose to invest and have the scale, and then responds to a demand that hopefully is there in the future. So yeah, that whole talking to plant upgrades, it's all about that chicken and egg problem we've seen. There's also been a theme around the products around rolling out of new options, and how do you actually get past the curve of innovation failure and kind of get past the testing regimes and whatever that actually allows you to actually have some confidence around those products and the level of kind of support for that. We've seen some signals from various organisations that say they're going to support that, but actually what does that mean for suppliers that actually need a bit of help to get past that innovation curve? There's also very strong kind of theme around products and a very prescriptive standards and percentages of various ingredients, etc. And how do we move beyond that? Because some of these new opportunities and products actually have a different set of ingredients, and how do we actually support that shift to performance-based specifications and actually deal with a kind of a new normal? And that's been quite a critical issue around, the ability to actually shift with the standards process that has not necessarily been fast to respond to innovations in the marketplace when maybe those new products are doing something completely different than the way the standards were intended to be, or the way that they were actually written. There's also many supply chain constraints in terms of those, whether that's because of availability of resource supply. There's one example of the amount of scrap metal that actually gets into lower carbon steel by using larger amounts of recycled steel. So there's an example there. But there's plenty of other examples of that. Aluminium's another one where we have to date not actually recycled our own aluminium for our facade systems. Only cans have been, but the rest of we're not doing the 75% recycled aluminium content that's happening in Europe right now. So there's a number of things that are really barriers in terms of seeing products that actually are enabling to actually reduce their raw resources and actually lower their embodied carbon in that process. And then there's skills. This is an emerging area. When I actually helped write that dictionary on carbon as part of the working group and brought all of those people together, it was quite clear that people's knowledge of terminology and language and just how do we actually, what we say in this embodied carbon space and the focus in various areas is very unfamiliar to many who've been in the industry for 20, 30 years. It's language that they've never come across. So there's a huge capacity building of the industry around understanding what does this mean. And the literacy is very low in terms of outside of the bubble of those that are involved with MECLA, for example. There's a literacy issue around this. It's not something they've really been a part of. So how do we actually bring the industry forward when it actually needs to start early in their university or their educational side of things, but throughout their industry now that they're in various things? And how do they not become barriers because it's a new product and they don't know what the hell you mean when you say it's low carbon and they're just wanting to build something? So there's quite a lot that we need to do to support that, and particularly when you bring in other concepts like circular economy and those kind of processes, you're starting to introduce things that they start to get nervous around that. So some pretty key themes already and issues that we see as being fundamental as to how we look at kind of the policy platform framework that we can actually help to recommend and where we focus activities. The process, though, we're going through is to take all of that learning, as well as the work that's been done before, as well as what's happening in the global sphere. There's over 250 embodied carbon policy initiatives that are happening. I think about over 100 of those are actually regulation in various levels of government that actually are informing our issues paper that we are looking to launch about the middle of the year, which really helps to synthesize across those themes and issues, as well as the broader policy landscape of what's happening, as well as the input from MECLA and others like DBI, as to what informs kind of the policy framework that we take forward from there. Recently, we did an engagement briefing with MECLA, and there's a survey out there at the moment, which I'll have a link to in a minute, which we will close probably today, so we can utilise that information. And that's really to inform what's the level of importance of those issues that I've shared, those themes, and anything else that we haven't already identified. And the intention is to then, as I said, issue that paper in mid-year with a comprehensive policy framework to come out about mid-October. What's out of scope? There are a number of things that we're not doing. So we're not trying to re-prosecute what Neighbours has done. We're not trying to redefine what's part of previous things that are already happening. So we're actually trying to consolidate what's actually been going on to make sure that we're not redoing things. But we aren't actually creating new benchmarks. We're not doing capacity building. We're not trying to cover things that are broadly outside of what Neighbours is essentially doing as well. So we're actually trying to just make sure that we're aligned and actually focusing on things that actually will leverage and scale up the embodied carbon and the way in which we can actually support that through policy. There's probably plenty of things that are out of scope, and one of them is that I haven't mentioned. But one of them I wanted to highlight was that we're focusing on things that relate to A1 to A5. So that's on your diagram, that's the A1 to A3 products, and A4 and A5 transport and construction. We're recognising that operational and end-of-life stages are definitely things that we need to address, but they are for next recommendations. We won't be doing detailed policy recommendations within that space. There's plenty enough issues in the upfront carbon area, and that particular boundaries is the same boundary that Neighbours use within their embodied carbon rating tool as well. So align with that. That's the survey, either the QR code there or the link. I'm very keen to get feedback from everyone. And certainly if there's issues or themes that I haven't mentioned and you haven't seen that, please let us know, because we want to make sure we're cognizant of those issues as we develop up our response to those in the framework and share your insights. And then today we hope to get some more of that, because we've identified some of the things that we see for the transition needing some answers. And so we need some help. And so today is a chance for you to provide some feedback as part of that as well. So with that, I think I'm going to hand back over to you. And I should have handed it back over.
Thanks. I might just wrap up the big information dissemination session just with a call to say this is the start of the ASBEC journey with you all. We recognise that there is an ultimate goal of buildings that are compatible with nature, living in an environment. You know, we need to look at urban policy. We need to look at all the social aspects. We need to look at rehabilitating our natural environment. We recognise that, again, it's easy to get embodied carbon tunnel vision, but we know that we just need to keep walking forward. There's so much we need to tackle. This is a really practical, logical next step in our decarbonisation journey. Fear not that we have that embodied carbon vision. We do have our eye on the prize, the cultural change that is required to embed circular principles in the way we use and plan our built environment. But this is a really good first step towards that ultimate goal.